Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel on enlargement, neighborhood policy, and Europe's geopolitical reach. And I just want to give a few introductory remarks. At a time of profound geopolitical transformation, the European Union's engagement with its wider neighborhood has become increasingly important for both regional stability and the EU's global role. Through enlargement policy, neighborhood initiatives, political conditionality, and various forms of multi-level cooperation, the EU seeks not only to promote democratic governance, economic development, and the rule of law, but also to strengthen its influence in an increasingly competitive international environment. So a central question facing policymakers and scholars today concerns the credibility of the current enlargement process, particularly with regard to the Western Balkans. And while the EU continues to affirm its commitment to the region's European future, prolonged accession timelines, evolving political conditions, and shifting geopolitical priorities have raised important questions about the effectiveness and reliability of enlargement as a transformative policy instrument. So beyond formal accession mechanisms, networks of cooperation play a critical role in fostering integration and strengthening ties between the EU and its neighboring regions. So academic exchanges, like this one this week, and cultural initiatives, civil society partnerships, and other transnational platforms create channels for dialogue, trust building, and knowledge sharing. So these networks contribute not only to regional cooperation and stability, but also extend the EU's normative and political influence beyond its borders. Today's discussion will explore how enlargement and neighborhood policies interact with these broader forms of engagement and what this means for Europe's geopolitical position in the years ahead. So how can the EU maintain the credibility of its enlargement agenda? What role do non-governmental and transnational actors play in advancing integration? And how do these processes shape the EU's capacity to project influence, foster stability, and respond to emerging geopolitical challenges? So we're really fortunate today to have a distinguished panel of experts who will help us examine these questions and more from a range of perspectives, and I look forward to an engaging, insightful discussion with you all. So we should have time for discussion at the end. So let me just introduce the panelists all together, and then we will start with Vedran Džihić. So Vedran Džihić is a guest here and visitor many times for our events from the Austrian Institute of International Affairs. Then Miruna, Troncota, I don't know where she is, but she should emerge at some point. I'll introduce her when she gets here. We also have Mirela Metushaj, who is from Aleksandër Moisiu University of Durrës, and she is also a frequent visitor here, we are glad to say, and Ivana Stepanović, our researcher here at iASK. So, Vedran, I will ask you to begin today.
Yes. Should I use the mic?
People online.
Oh, okay, great, of course, yes. Thank you so much. I mean, on such a hot day, such a cool or hot topic, I don't know. The topic of enlargement, I mean, even if it would be a hot topic, if you have a hot topic for 26 years, it starts cooling off. To a certain extent, at least for the Western Balkans, it might be that for Ukraine, Moldova, certainly not for Georgia, it's a bit hotter. But let me make few points, and I'll try to be within the range of time so that we have enough time to discuss. I will just provide you with a short intro, starting with a joke, hopefully not as a bad one, then open up 4 dilemmas, or discuss 4 dilemmas that I see in the process of enlargement, and then just briefly define what I see as a chance. both for the EU, but also for the region of the Western Balkans. First of all, I mean, jokes are frequently told in the Western Balkans. I mean, I'm from Bosnia originally, and in Bosnia and Herzegovina we tell jokes all the time to cope with dire reality. So we have hyperproduction of jokes. Whatever happens today in Kőszeg might be a subject of a joke tomorrow in Bosnia. So Julie, take care. You never know. But on a serious joke side, I mean, there are wonderful joke tellers. One of those people from the Balkans, but from Bulgaria, telling jokes all the time to portray political problems is Ivan Krastev. So he usually has a series of jokes, and then, of course, if you hear him talking several times during a short period of time, it might be that the jokes repeat, but nevertheless. And there is this joke about the EU integration and EU enlargement that he kept telling a few years ago. As the topic has cooled off for some, he stopped telling the joke, but now that we have a front runner, Montenegro, the joke could be adjusted to the following one. So when is Montenegro going to join the European Union? Then we could say it's going to be during, I don't know, presidency, EU Council's presidency of Hungary or something, and that would be a kind of an optimistic take. And the pessimistic take would be that Montenegro would join the European Union during the Council presidency of Albania or something, which you know, it's a bit paradoxical. Anyway, but when we speak about enlargement, I think we can certainly say that there is a new geopolitical momentum. And when we say geopolitical momentum, it doesn't mean a lot. So we have to see what is the geopolitical momentum. I think there is a security momentum, which is recognized by the European Union, as much as China, Russia, third actors, as we call them, pressure the European Union. There is an increased urge by the European Union to start pushing for the enlargement for security reasons. And of course, here the big elephant in the room is Ukraine. So, I mean, of course, Ukraine is pushing the enlargement topic and not the Western Balkans. So Western Balkans, a small region, is lagging behind. Montenegro is a front runner, but the big elephant in the room, both in terms of security but also future of Europe, is Ukraine. So I would say there is a new geopolitical momentum from the security point of view. And the question mark we need to put behind geopolitical momentum in terms of values and norms of the European Union. I don't think that the EU has tremendously changed its approach when it comes to values and underlying norms of the European Union. And I mean here liberal norms and liberal values as still let's say, a kind of a pragmatic and to a certain extent, transactional approach towards the candidate countries is pretty dominant. So, take example of Montenegro. Montenegro is a front runner. It has just recently closed 2 new chapters. It is marching towards closing all the chapters towards the end of the year. But for example, Montenegro, in the rush to fulfill the formal criteria for the EU enlargement, on one single day, in 1 hour and 30 minutes, issued 25 substantial laws in the parliament without any substantial debate on those laws. So actually fulfilling and ticking the boxes. But the big question remains, where is the substance? And we do have, even in the case of Montenegro, we have like tough political questions behind. We have a pro-Serbian, pro-Russian party in the government. We have the Speaker of the Parliament who comes from the Serbian party, etc., etc. There are a lot of issues in such a small country, and here not to speak about more complicated cases like Serbia, like Kosovo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, my home country, etc., etc. So this is the question of the geopolitical momentum. We need to, as the EU needs probably to leverage actually the security concerns, the strategic foresight of the European Union with norms and values, and find a kind of a new way towards the EU enlargement in general. And I would argue that it seems, at least at the surface, to put this enlargement question high, as it happened now in Tivat at this meeting of the Western Balkan Summit meeting, but looking into the substance of the process, those non-papers, which are still informal documents, etc., etc., everything is still the same when it comes to enlargement as it was like the last 20 years. So that's a kind of an intro. And here, like 4 dilemmas that I see briefly, one by one, and of course we have hopefully more time in the Q&A to discuss them. First dilemma is the dilemma between front runners and back runners in this process. You probably remember all that Serbia used to be a front runner for the EU enlargement, even during the first kind of parts of the regime of Aleksandër Vučić. So Serbia was fulfilling the formal criteria, was praised by the European Commission as the biggest country. There were interests by the German economy, by European economies, etc., etc., and those are interests to keep Serbia closer to the European family. So front runner, which in the meantime has turned into a full-fledged, almost full-fledged authoritarian system. Now we have Montenegro and Albania as a front runner. At the same time, and this is going to be my last point, and you will probably tell us more about the protests in Albania, the Pink Flamingos revolution is exposing actually Edi Rama's facade of Europeanization and EU integration, leading to a process where we can end up again having one of the front runners, Albania, now marching towards I don't know what. I mean, there is still a support by the EU Commission, and Marta Kos wants to go hiking with Edi Rama and I don't know what. But I think the substance of this facade is eroding. So there is this kind of interplay, back runners, front runners, which I still, and that will be my argument, it doesn't matter a lot whether you are front runner or back runner. The substance needs to be found in the implementation of fundamental European norms and values beyond mere formalized issuing of laws. So there's this gap between laws, formal level of compliance and the substance. So the second dilemma is the dilemma that I see on a much deeper societal level, and this is the dilemma that the European Union has no magical stick to resolve. And this dilemma is the dilemma between democratic and liberal tendencies within all those societies and illiberal and authoritarian tendencies with those societies that are candidate countries for the European Union. And I think this dilemma is best or worst at display in Serbia, which really since 2012 until today has managed to become one of the 10 globally most autocratized countries worldwide, by still being a candidate for the EU membership. And the EU has, during the protests, Serbian protests that we see since November 2004, to a certain extent slightly adjusted its policies, and there is even some type of sanctions where some money is withheld from Serbia, but there is no substantial change. So my argument would be here in the second dilemma, how to promote liberal democracy if you still play the so-called mild stabilitocracy approach towards some of those leaders, including Edi Rama in Albania, but most obviously in the case of Aleksandër Vučić. And we shall not forget, Serbia is the biggest country in the Western Balkans. It is an important country, and it has a strong influence both on Bosnia and Herzegovina, on Montenegro, on Kosovo, etc., on the overall course of the EU enlargement. So I think here we need to see how to, and the European Union needs to see how to balance if it wants the EU enlargement to flourish substantially. The third dilemma is the dilemma of credibility of the European Union. I think the credibility of the European Union has in the Western Balkans, despite the fact that still majority of the population support nominally the EU enlargement and EU integration, it has suffered. It has suffered in almost all the countries, and it has suffered most dramatically in the case of Serbia, where the support is probably now approximately 40% or just a bit more than 40%. But it's not only about the public opinion and the support for the European integration. So it might be, for example, if we see a regime change in Serbia, it might be that the public support for the EU would again rise if there is a pro-European government. We don't know, but so that's a kind of up and down. But what we have as a substance is the lack or the loss of credibility in terms of the long duration of the process. First of all, it's 26 years. So when you wait for 26 years for something, even if you are the youngest and if you are the student, and then you have to wait 26 years to become, I don't know, to get some kind of a reward, it's exhausting. So there is this momentum where you lose credibility. There was a huge blow with a few years ago with Macedonia, North Macedonia, when Macedonia was promised actually to start negotiations once the country resolves the question with the question of national sovereignty and the name. With Greece, the country delivered, the EU betrayed North Macedonia, which was a huge blow to the credibility. And we should be cautious and see that those potential blows for the credibility of the European Union in this process are they haven't disappeared. They are on the road towards the membership, and one of the biggest is the let's say French political situation. If you want to put the cards on the table, so we have Montenegro probably closing the chapters. The accession treaty is negotiated right now, so it's going to be probably ready, but then comes the ratification, and you know, as we still have the unanimity within the European Union, and there is still no qualified majority when it comes to the enlargement decisions, all 27 countries have to ratify the Montenegro's agreement. It's going to be difficult to a certain extent with Croatia, because Croatia has some open bilateral issues, but it's going to be most difficult with France. If France gets a new far-right president, which is most probably the future that we are looking into, I don't see any path for ratifying the Montenegrin accession treaty anytime soon. So that's the credibility dilemma. And the last dilemma is something that brings us closer to some topics that might be also Ivana is going to pick up on, and that's the dilemma of a persistence of reactionary nationalism or ethnic nationalism in the Western Balkans despite 26 years of EU integration. So, I mean, we have it in the member states, like in Croatia. So when you remember the last summer and the concert of Thompson, this fascist far-right extreme singer, where 500,000 people attended the concert in close to Zagreb, and this is a huge exclamation mark towards the negative reactionary side of the history. And we do have in the Balkans, first of all, those old lines and cleavages where conflicts are still here and instrumentalized by political elites, be it the Croatia-Serbia, be it within Bosnia, be it between Serbia and Bosnia and Bosniaks, be it between, to a certain extent, Serbia and Montenegro, where you have also tensions, and of course Kosovo in Serbia, which is an undisputed problem of a huge dimension that we have no resolution whatsoever, and part of this reactionary nationalism, which stands contrary to all the values and norms and principles of the European integration, is a very strong revisionism. We are now end of June. It's going to be now in a few days. It's going to be the anniversary of Srebrenica, of the genocide in Srebrenica. And once again, as it unfortunately happens each and every year, there will be an outburst of genocide denial, of wildest reactionary nationalism around this horrific event that happened in July 1995, which is just one of the example. And the more holistic and so to say substantial problem is that many of the nations in the Western Balkans, in the meantime, have nurtured and established almost holistic systems of truth based on the selective interpretation of the past and of the events from the past. And I think this is haunting also the process of the European integration quite strongly. To finish, there are I think that the process is still very protracted. Even though the EU promises and we want to push the enlargement and Montenegro is positive, etc., I don't think that substantially we see a major change, major shift. We see certain shifts, certain attempts, but the major shift I don't see. Where I see the new energies, and this might be where my colleague from Albania would like to pick up, I see the new energies and new emancipatory pro-European liberal potentials in the small contentious protest movements, grassroots initiatives, mobilizations around environmental degradation, around injustice, etc. And of course, Albanian pink flamingo revolution is a major and a tremendous structural change to the Albanian society, first of all. So this is for the first time since the dictatorship of Enver Hoxha that you have an emancipatory process where actually the broader, from the people, carried by the people, carried by the Gen Z, by the millennials, by younger generations. The same what we saw in the Serbian protests, even though of course there is this kind of a huge debate about the heterogeneity of the Serbian protests. So I think there is, to finish, a substantial emancipation and Europeanization on the lower strata of the societies going on, while the formal process of the Europeanization still remains in a kind of a very, very difficult and I would say interregnum, if you wish. So that continues to be dominant for almost 26 years. Thank you so much, and I hope I didn't take too much time.
Is this one is on too? Yeah. Thank you. You gave a really great framing for how we can continue. I just wanted to bring up a couple of points that struck me. It's the concentration of complexity in these smaller states that is, it's fascinating and challenging. I mean, other countries have the same sets of problems, but not in such a concentrated form. I wanted to just bring to your attention too that one of the experience of East European accession to the EU was that we competed against each other. We didn't unify as a bloc to try to mitigate some of the absolutely changing conditions that the EU required of us. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen either in the Western Balkans, unfortunately. And also, this example of Macedonia, the EU does not look like a reliable actor all the time. So that's another, thing something else that needs to be confronted. I think I will give Miruna time to catch her breath here, and we will move to Mirela. No problem at all. We have enough talent on this stage. So I'm turning back
Thank you. I have a presentation. I have to turn back a little to the topic of this morning. So why European identity matters for security. Yes. So the title of this small discussion, Culture as Compass, Why European Identity Matters for Security, invites us all to reconsider some of the most conventional assumptions about what security means per se and how it is sustained. So when security is discussed in academic or in political or in strategic cycles, the conversation often gravitates toward familiar concepts that are military, deterrence, intelligence cooperation, border control, or increasingly cyber defense. These dimensions continue to remain, so far very important, in a geopolitical, let's say, environment shaped by war, by a hybrid threats and technological disruption, Europe continues to invest heavily in strengthening its hard security capacities. However, limited security to military preparedness or institutional defense offers only a partial understanding of the challenges contemporary societies are facing, let's say, nowadays. So, why identity matters for security? I would like to propose a broader perspective, one that places culture and collective identity at the center of the security analysis. My central argument is straightforward yet significant. Security is not only about protecting territory, institutions, or sovereignty. It is also about protecting the values, above all the values, the narratives, and the shared meanings that hold societies, entire societies, together. So this raises an essential question. What exactly is Europe defending nowadays? Is Europe merely protecting geopolitical borders? It is defending economic interests, or it is safeguarding something deeper, a civilization project built upon shared values, historical memory, and normative commitments. Is that so? So I would argue that let's say Europe. Sorry. Someone is calling me. I would argue that Europe's security cannot be fully understood without engaging with the question of the identity. This is because threats in the 21st century, in our big century, increasingly targets not only physical infrastructure, but also the social and psychological, above all, the psychological foundation of democratic societies. The disinformation campaigns, political extremism that is raising everywhere, radical polarization, and foreign interferences often seeks to erode the trust of the communities, of the societies, fragment social cohesion, and weaken collective purpose, the purpose of the collectivity. To understand why European identity matters for security, we must first address a fundamental question. What do we actually mean by European identity? We discussed a little this morning about this topic, and we had some questions. This question is far more complex than it may initially appear. Unlike national identity, which is often built around common language, historical memory, ethnicity, or shared state institutions, European identity operates in a supranational level, in another level. It attempts to generate a sense of belonging of these communities that transcend national borders, without necessarily replacing the feeling or the national identity. So this duality makes European identity both unique and very, let's say, very, very challenging. Europe has historically been shaped by extraordinary diversity. It encompasses multiple civilization, we know that, religious traditions, philosophical schools, political systems, and collective memory. So these differences have always produced unity. Not always have produced the unity. In many moments, the European history, diversity becomes, as we know, very often, not only in the Balkans, in the region of the Balkans, produce very often, it's a source of conflict between the states. So, yet the European project that emerged after the Second World War introduced a transformative, let's say, idea. Peace could be sustained not merely through military balances, but through political integration and shared values. This post-war vision gradually formed the normative basis of what we recognize today as the European identity. The foundations of European identity, the core of them, is democracy, is human rights, rule of law, pluralism, equality, dignity of the individual is very important lately. So these principles serve as a common reference point to across the very diverse societies. Political philosopher Jürgen Habermas introduced the concept of constitutional patriotism. That is very interesting, suggesting that modern political belonging can emerge not from ethnicity, but from shared commitment to democratic norms and institutions. This framework is especially useful to understand our situation, the situation of Europe, let's say. The concept of security has evolved dramatically over the last century, over time, over decades. Traditional security studies, particularly within realist international relations theory, viewed security primarily through the lens of the state survival. We all know this. Security meant protecting territorial integrity, sovereignty, and national interest against external threats. This framework remains relevant till today. However, in our century has transformed the nature of the threats as we know itself. Security today extends beyond conventional welfare. For example, the disinformation campaigns, the cyber warfare, the hybrid attacks, the electoral interferences, extremism, mobilization, the social fragmentation that is very, very, very important. So, let's say the community in his total refers to the ability of the communities to preserve the identity, the social stability, and the cultural continuity in the face of the perceived threats. Culture is often dismissed, let's say, as secondary to hard power concerns. This is, in my point of view, a mistake. Culture plays a strategic role in how societies interpret reality. It shapes collective memory, defines social norms, and influences responses to the uncertainty. For this reason, culture functions as a powerful security resource. The concept of soft power, introduced by Joseph Nee, emphasizes the ability to influence through attraction rather than coercion. So, yet culture offers sometimes beyond influence. It strengthens internal resilience. Culture creates meaning in the community, within the community. Shared narratives allow citizens to understand who they are, what values they share, and what they collective stand for. It's very, very important. This shared symbolic framework become crucial during a period of crisis, let's say. So, when societies encounter uncertainty or uncertain situation, whether caused by war, by migration, or economic instability, or political disruption, citizens seek orientation. And without orientation, fear grows. And after this fear, it's a fuel for polarization, for populism, for radicalization. So, culture helps mitigate this process. Culture allows societies to distinguish, permit them to distinguish legitimate disagreement from destabilization, information from manipulation, criticism from propaganda is very important. So this filtering capacity is increasingly important in the age of digital era. So information warfare often succeed not because false narratives are persuasive in themselves, but because trust, social trust, has already weakened. Where trust declines, manipulation becomes easier to act. So culture acts as a stabilizing force. It strengthens belongings inside, within the community. It reinforces civic responsibility. It reduces the external manipulation, the force or the possible force of external manipulation. Therefore, culture should not be treated merely as a heritage preservation or symbolic diplomacy. It should be recognized as part of security architecture, in the sense that culture truly acts as a compass, guiding societies through complexity and uncertain situation that very often lately are happening everywhere. So Europe today faces a profound paradox. On one hand, European identity provides an important source of strength. On the other hand, that some identity remains contested and very fragile. The European Union represents one of the most ambitious political integration projects in modern history. It transformed a continent once devastated by war into a space of cooperation between these countries and relative peace. Yet integration has not eliminated internal and external tensions. For example, in the recent years, Europe has witnessed the populist movements, nationalism rhetoric, Euroscepticism, anti-globalization sentiment that are very, very common nowadays. So the paradox lies here. Europe depends on collective identity for resilience, not at the same time and the same way struggles to strengthen that identity. Global crises intensify this challenge, this big challenge. The challenge for Europe is therefore not to erase national identities that we discussed some before, rather is to build a new kind of belonging. So citizens must be able to feel both national, rooted and European. So it's a very combined and delicate binom. Successfully managing this paradox will significantly shape European future security.
Just a few minutes.
Yes, I'm going at the end. So. We come now to conclusion with one final reflection. Europe is often described in economic or institutional terms. We speak of markets, regulations, treaties, and governance structures, yet such description, let's say, part of European, it's very weak. Europe is more than a geographic space, more than an economic union, more than a political project. It is deepest level. Europe is a cultural and moral idea. It represents a historical attempt to build peace through cooperation, diversity through pluralism, and solidarity through shared norms. This is why Europe matters. Culture provides meaning, and meaning creates belonging in the people. So belonging strengthens the resilience, and the resilience reinforces influence in a very direct way to the security. This brings us to the central metaphor of this discussion, of this talk. Culture functions as a compass. A compass does not remove danger, as we know. It does not eliminate uncertainty in everyday life or prevent storms, but it provides direction when visibility or uncertainty is there or is low. So in moment of crisis, societies need orientation. As a flamingo situation in Albania, all the population is raised and is asking to change the regime, let's call it that way, and they need a kind of orientation to succeed, because actually they don't have any orientation yet. So they need shared principles capable of guiding collective actions. Is very important. European identity, despite its complexity and internal tensions, can provide that orientation. It can help Europe remain anchored to democratic values and to create the new one with new realities. So. Yeah, thank you very much. I ran a little, but I'm open for questions and also for the flamingo situation.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much. Mirela, I really, you opened up a lot of important questions that I think we need to address in the discussion, like what is European security based on? How much do West European countries, EU members, actually embody those foundational elements you talked about of European identity? I mean, I think we should look at that a little bit more critically as well. And I really like this configuration of culture that builds trust, that builds resilience, that builds security. I really like that configuration. Okay, now we will move on to Miruna Butnaru-Troncota from the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration. Welcome. You're here for the first time, so
thank you very much.
Will not be the last. Okay.
Definitely, hope so. Thank you very much to the organizer, to Jody, and I'm very honored to be here in this distinguished panel with experts that I admire. I'm from Romania, and in Romania, when you are a Western Balkans expert, you are really like a flamingo, you know. So I wanted to discuss about the flamingo in the room, right? Unfortunately, it's a bit exotic, even though Romania has a priority to support EU integration of the Western Balkans, but most often I give Hungary as an example of how diplomatic rhetoric, which is very present in the case of Romania, should be transformed in action. And I also believe that this institute and other initiatives Hungarian funded towards the Western Balkans and the candidate countries are very relevant and important. So in my presentation I will try to be complementary to my co-panelists. So what I proposed when I saw the topic is to offer an overview of the current status of EU enlargement and in this geopolitical environment. So I'll do a little bit of combining academic work, because I have published 2 recent academic works on that, to transform them into less academic language and more policy oriented, right? Because the discussion is, let's understand what is going on with enlargement right now. Why is it relevant for the Balkans, but also for the new candidates, Republic of Moldova and Ukraine? So I'll bring them both here in this discussion, and then discuss a bit the main dilemmas, the main opportunities, because there are many opportunities too. And then in the end, I will propose to discuss 4 scenarios for the next years by 2030, because Charles Michel was the one to throw this year, right? We should have a new enlargement wave by 2030, right? So the question is, looking at how things look right now, is that feasible? And out of these scenarios that I propose to you, and I would love for all of us to discuss, I will argue for one of them, the most challenging and provocative one, because I really want to annoy some of you, okay? No, I'm joking, but just to bring a little bit of debate. Right, so 3 days ago, there was the European Council. All the eyes were in Brussels. And the German Chancellor Merz made a statement which was in a way very comforting for the region, but also worrying for some member states, like every time Merz speaks, right? So first of all, he confirmed the fact that we finally have one country of the Western Balkans, namely Montenegro, ready for accession. The country could now enter the final stage of the process. I'm now quoting him from his public statement. However, and there is always a however, so this is the status of enlargement. Some positive developments, however, right? I think this is describes very well the situation. Should all Western Balkan countries join together or one after the other? This is a critical question pointed by the German Chancellor. There are good reasons to say all together, but there are also good reasons to say one after another. And then Merz referred to the Franco-German non-paper that France and German, based on a group of experts, published 2 years ago, which will be discussed in the next European Council in October. That is a report that refers to profound reform of the voting system in the European Council, the so-called unanimity vote to be changed to a qualified majority vote, with the idea that EU needs to reform before it gets in new member states. So he brings in this discussion. But what was most provocative, and I think this place is a great place for us to discuss this statement, he said, it is important that we do not decide whether to accelerate the accession process, But what we decide is how we can accelerate the accession process. And there were a lot of comments after this, and I think this is a good starting point for us too. So practically, Germany, which is one of the greatest advocates of EU integration of the Western Balkans, just states, we will reform the EU anyway. We will have new member states no matter the conditions. The question is how we accelerate the process. So it's clear that the process will take place, right? And looking a bit over the past years and looking at what experts wrote, then we can understand that there was this glooming enlargement fatigue, and in my article I also call it that became enlargement burnout, right? To compare it to a psychological status, right? So it started with feeling tired on enlargement, especially after Croatia's accession. They had so much to do with Romania and Bulgaria on anti-corruption problems that member states were confronted with many internal crises, so they said no more enlargement. Enlargement is not a priority anymore. So confronted with this enlargement burnout, suddenly in 2022 the war in Ukraine manages to give some really, really strong pills to the European Council that the shift in perspective transforms into what I called strategic enthusiasm for enlargement. So suddenly, the European Council, the same member states that in 2019 blocked North Macedonia and Albania, voted without any remorse, we think, for starting negotiations and accepting the applications of Republican Moldova and Ukraine. Ukraine, a country that was in a full-scale war with Russia at that point, right? So, of course, in a geopolitical sense, it's very easy to understand why, but for experts in enlargement, this looked a bit like is something artificial going on, right? It's like there are some, maybe toxic behaviors in this, transforming the burnout into huge enthusiasm and energy for enlargement. So some of the experts were very, very worried, and I must confess, I was also one of these experts. So we know that before the war in Ukraine started, the Commission proposed a new enlargement methodology, right? The new rules of the game. And this new methodology, which was proposed exactly a few days before the pandemic started, had three main driving forces. Fundamentals first, so we start with rule of law, we start with anti-corruption. This was the main lesson learned from Romania and Bulgaria's fiasco. And then we put the 35 chapters into clusters in order to facilitate in a more organic way the technocratic transfer of norms. And then they introduced something that has never been part of conditionality for EU integration, neither for Central and Eastern European countries nor for the others. And that was the reversibility of enlargement, the reversibility of negotiation, which meant, a country, no matter how much it advances, it can also go back. The process is reversible. This was an attempt for the European Union to address the accusations of stabilitocracy, right? Looking at the huge de-Europeanization tendencies in Serbia and other countries, then European Commission needed to distance itself and to say, okay, we are aware of that, we will try to play a stricter role with carrots and sticks, trying to use the sticks finally, right? Not just discussing theoretically about them. So the concept that I propose in the two academic papers that I wrote on this is the fundamental shift that came after the war in Ukraine started is not only that we have two new candidates together with the older Western Balkan candidates, Republic of Moldova and Ukraine, because Georgia left this group of Eastern Partnership trio. The concept is wartime enlargement politicization. Politicization has always existed, especially in foreign and security policy for the EU. We all know the arguments. We can easily understand why for a club with strict rules and getting in new countries, and this is the enlargement policy, it's a very political discussion because you need to address your own audience, your own citizens, you need to address the supranational level and the intergovernmental. So your EU enlargement policy deals with the essentials of what the EU is: supranational structure in an intergovernmental political decision-making system. So practically, it's not something new to say, yes, we have more politicized enlargement during a wartime. But the interesting thing is to look at, okay, how we understand politicization and what kind of politicization takes place in wartime, because the European Union never experienced that. Never, right? In the case of other wars, let's say the wars in Yugoslavia in the 90s, there was not a European Union as we know it today, so we cannot talk about that. How do academics define politicization? If you see it, how do you recognize it? Increased polarization of opinions. When we have disagreeing points of view on fundamental elements, that's a perfect basis for politicization. And these disagreements, this increase of polarization of interest, values, and opinions, and here is where also culture plays a fundamental role, are publicly advanced. So they are visible. Actors engage in public discussions, not only behind closed doors, right? So whenever we see this clash of perspectives, then we have politicization. And why? How does this influence EU? Because this affects the process of policy formulation. In this case, EU enlargement decision-making. We have some member states in the Council that are opposing enlargement. This is a clear form of politicization. They have openly opposed, like France did, but some others hide behind France, and I think Vedran referred to some of them, so I'll not back on that. But this is what politicization of enlargement means, right? And there are two perspectives on how to look at this politicization. Is it a good news or a bad news? Jean Monnet is openly quoted and misquoted by saying European Union and European community is a result of crisis, right? So there is a little bit of crisis-loving politicians and, let's say, bureaucrats in the EU who say politicization is good, it's part of the rules of the game, it makes EU innovative. With every crisis, EU adapted, reshifted, and reinvented itself. It's great to have politicization, right? And this belongs to the neo-functionalist perspective, who say, let's have more and more crises in order to have a stronger and stronger EU. Well, of course, we have the people who don't agree with that, and they have the pessimist view, those are the post-functionalists, and who say, wait a minute, this sounds like disintegration. We are going more and more towards polarization, fragmentation. We see it in conflicts and wars. We see it in European Council decisions, and that is not very helpful for the EU. We see that EU cannot act as one, right? Which is totally against the rhetoric. So actually, more and more crises for an EU that becomes more and more fragmented is a sign for disintegration. Well, this is something that Kremlin likes, right? We know this narrative because Putin uses it very often. So post-functionalists, of course, are not paid by Kremlin. I'm not suggesting that. It's just that they are a bit cautious about how great crises are, and they're not misquoting Jean Monnet. Now, coming back to and this is the main point that I'm making before discussing the scenarios, the main dilemma of EU enlargement at this moment is how to deal with this wartime enlargement politicization, right? Because there are various options. Now we have this very, very different group. Initially, we had only 3 categories of candidate and potential candidate countries. So we had Serbia and Montenegro. They were the front runners in the beginning. They started first, 2012, 2014. Then the second group, Albania and North Macedonia, which have been penalized by politicization, but they were open to negotiate. They were even open to change their constitutional name, by the way, in order to make the process go. And then we have Bosnia and Herzegovina and Kosovo, both at that time, before 2022, potential candidate countries, because they were the countries most affected by ethno-nationalist and even constitutional problems. Now we have, again, 3 groups in 2026, but their composition is very, very different. We have the front runners, who at this point are Montenegro and Albania. Now people looking at Flamingo Revolution are saying, well, I'm not sure this looks like a front runner, right? I mean, we have just the government that is being contested with the biggest civil society protest ever in the last 30 years. But that's also a good sign on one hand. But these are the front runners, and Montenegro has been officially confirmed, like Chancellor Merz said, that by 2030 would have all chances to become a member state. And then we have North Macedonia and Serbia in a sort of improvised group because in a way North Macedonia is being blocked by a political, again, politicization of Bulgarian's position, and Serbia with an ongoing political crisis and contestation and even signs of an authoritarian ruling. Bosnia and Herzegovina opened. Yes, just to finish the three groups. So Kosovo applied for membership after 2022, but did not receive an answer, also because of its very fragile political situation. So with this different picture, we have two geopolitical newcomers, Ukraine and Republic of Moldova. Ukraine is a country at war for the moment, and Republic of Moldova is heavily hit by the hybrid warfare of Russian Federation. Nevertheless, Moldova has shown a lot of openness for even opening the chapters of negotiation and having a very, very fast accession process. Which are the four scenarios that I want to propose to you? First is accession as a package, accession as a package, right? Some countries say it's not possible to have a new Croatia, one country only enlargement wave. So we will have a package. What would be this package? The most probable one, looking at how negotiation advance, are Montenegro and Albania. So there will be no exception for Ukraine and Moldova, no matter how emotional we are about their behavior in the war and so on. The most strict application of merit-based negotiation are Montenegro and Albania. This is the first scenario, putting together two countries. Second, accession one by one, only by merit. This is the most stricter version that even some countries like France maybe would be capable to accept. And this scenario would involve, of course, first Montenegro, maybe Moldova, and then others who manage to finish negotiations. Third, and this is the one that, this is the version that I'm trying to advocate for, accession with partial decoupling. So we would have decoupling because it's impossible not to have, but we will have a partial decoupling, meaning we start with two countries strategically chosen from both groups in order to offer a geopolitical sign, and then we take the others based on merit. And these two countries would be Montenegro and the Republic of Moldova. They are as small, they are as less strategically, yes. And they start with men, exactly. A great resemblance, and I'm sure that the technocratic brains in Brussels will definitely appeal to this, right? And the last one is the worst case scenario, no accession by 2030. There will be no negotiations closed by then. This is a worst scenario in a way, but some consider it the most realist. So just my last line, why accepting Montenegro and Republic of Moldova in this accelerated integration that Chancellor Merz and many others in European Council consider relevant to happen by 2030? It's a message sent to the Western Balkan group of candidates saying you will not be left out, you will continue the process, and Montenegro has the greatest merits, so we will show you that is done. Republic of Moldova will be a geopolitical sign for Ukraine, saying the integration of Ukraine is definitely more complex because of you. We started all this, and we integrate Moldova just to show you that it's possible and to send you the message that you will be next, right? Of course, I'm very aware of the possible consequences, but I would be happy to hear them from you and to hear your counter arguments to this, what I would consider the most, let's say, beneficial partial decoupling scenario for the moment in order to show that enlargement is alive, even though it's politicized.
Oh, thank you so much, Miruna. It was a very thorough and dynamic presentation, but which will bring up a lot of questions. In fact, we will ask the audience which scenario they think is their preferred or the most likely in that case. And I was really, I mean, it looks like we're not going to go for like a Big Bang Balkans scenario for sure. But I was also kind of wondering about the psychology of EU strategy. I mean, how we can explain this enlargement fatigue to burnout to strategic enthusiasm. It sounds kind of psychotic to me, actually. Of course, nothing is normal these days. Anyway, moving right along, we will now hear from Ivana and her presentation.
Thank you. Oh, thank you so much, Gergo, for the presentation. Let me check if I can move around it. Cool. So I wanted to focus on the issue of transitional justice because this is in my opinion, and this is what I will argue today, that this is the underlying problem that is not being really, it is not, of course, mentioned, of course, it has nothing to do with the formal accession process, but both Vedran and Mirela mentioned some things that are kind of in line with what I'm going to say. So first of all, transitional justice is something that remains as a sort of let's say unaddressed issue, but that is underlying a lot of the problems that are causing problems with rule of law, judicial independence, and freedom of press. And I will explain in two examples how this is really in practicing functioning. And what I also wanna emphasize here today is that we have outside of the formal politics, youth movements that are really starting to shape up politics. We could have talked about Gen Z before on social media, and this is what my book is about. But what we're seeing today is that some kind of movements are really forming to become political actors, and they are changing things politically, and they do bring up in sort of a little bit elusive for now ways transitional justice as well. Oh, I made a mistake. It's going backwards. So, to start by mentioning, it's really a long story, but I want to make a point. Why does the democratic backsliding in Serbia has really actually something to do also with the failed transitional justice project. First of all, that EU focuses on now especially on rule of law, independent judiciary, and fundamental rights, and this is precisely what is eroding after the protests have started, or let's say after. So Serbia has opened only 22 chapters, but closed only 2. And so the progress is frozen by failures precisely related to the rule of law and democratic governance. And since the Novi Sad canopy collapse on 1st of November 2024, we have exposure of this systemic corruption. But what it triggered really, the protests have then, mass protests have then caused the government to protect themselves by, in response, restricting the freedom of press, independence of judiciary, and then also they started with oppression and violence against students. And just to remind, many of you have no idea why the protest actually started. They haven't started because of the canopy collapse. They started because the students were attacked in front of their university while they were mourning 16 victims of the canopy collapse. So this is very important to emphasize, because in the news, in analytic articles, this is often neglected. This is where the student blockade started, and this is what really has risen to become a student movement, which is going to also be a political player in the future elections, which we don't know when they will happen. So this is what I wanted to emphasize. And then, of course, I wanted to mention that without transitional justice, really, EU accession is also structurally incomplete. And this is what is not really being mentioned, because EU accession is, of course, a formal process, legal process, political. But what is underneath there is that if we don't have facing the past and resolving ethno-nationalist problems, then the EU accession there will be problems in EU accession which we don't know where they're coming from, and actually we're not addressing the underlying problem. And just briefly, the case of Serbia and Kosovo is really a case in point, because what happened is that Serbia is now delivering, and withdrawal of Serbian institutions from Kosovo has happened, and so Serbia really is delivering, but what we have is a sort of a backlash which still is kind of brewing underneath the surface, and we can see, and Vedran mentioned it, that this is problematic, that in these Gen Z protests, there is somehow also some mentions of Kosovo which are very problematic. What is specifically a topic in its own, that these protests are calling upon some kind of patriotism and the national agenda, from the bringing back the national agenda and these kind of problems such as Kosovo, but in a very transnational way, because you have both nationalism and transnationalism and the criticism of nationalism within the student movement. But this is another topic, so I just wanted to mention how this is how it really backfires, because Vučić is delivering, but the protesters are saying they're building the Kosovo case as one of the cases against Vučić, which they are using everything they can against him. It is very interesting. And then just wanted to mention that, of course, the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina is that they reached the candidate status very recently in 2022. But again, if we're asking what really is the problem and what is the blockade there, why is Bosnia not advancing? And this is precisely due to the failure to deal with transitional justice, to reach any kind of agreement on the past, and somehow to reconcile the three constitutive ethnic peoples in Bosnia. And what is happening and brewing under the surface, and we could notice it in the protests, is that while the official politics is failing to even address these issues, they literally brush them under the carpet, and the transitional justice is almost forgotten, and they are almost working on the accession, like, let's forget about these teeny little problems such as facing the past, and let's continue with the accession process. Why this cannot go like that? And so for example, this cross-border solidarity, we can see this happening in the new post-war generations. My book is talking about how this is happening on social media in very informal ways. But what we started seeing, for example, in the protest in Serbia, is that because Serbia is a multicultural state, and there are a lot of nations, from Hungarians and Slovaks and Croats in the north to Albanians and Bosniaks in the south. What Serbs try to do in these protests, which lasts since 1st of November 2024, so for such a long time, they're trying to show that there is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, they are wearing the Serbian flags and putting them at the forefront, but they're trying to say we have very different identities under this flag. And so, and then they also made these kind of transnational alliances across the region. We had, so I want to show just some of the examples. So there were support protests, or so to say gatherings to support Serbian protests, the same like there are petitions, for example, and I noticed also some petitions where Serbs have signed the petitions to support Albanian protests, which is a very interesting also. It is a form of diplomacy and innovation in diplomacy, what these youth movements are doing. There is also a peculiar case, which also nobody reported on, I think, that Serbian students have actually did a kind of a type of a marathon or štafetna trčanje, I don't know how to translate, to Brussels, and they passed through Croatia. Relay. To Brussels, and actually they passed through Croatia, which is where Croatians have organized the arrival ceremonies and found them accommodation and support. And that, and during the protests in Serbia, we also have Croats or people from across the region coming to support them, help them, bring them food, whatever, donations, etc. And so that... also joint protests. So the Bosniak and Serb communities joining in Serbia, they made a statement, and this is where I first started hearing and reading the narratives of let's also accept that Srebrenica was a genocide, and they also couple this with Palestine. So this is very interesting, something new narratives that are emerging from somewhere within these protests. And for me as a social media researcher, I can find some narratives that are not emphasized in the traditional media but are present there. So those are just some of the examples. And now to conclude is that this youth diplomacy is really still an untapped resource, and we can talk about this also in the context of EU integration as somehow the underneath problem that is simmering underneath, and that there is also forms of new diplomacy that are emerging through that we can perceive through these protests. Specifically, and also these kind of diplomatic actions such as students running or cycling to Brussels, etc. And that even though so just to emphasize one more, the most important thing that I wanted to say here, and that I just to repeat it, that really transitional justice is something that needs to go back on the table in order to kind of really reach this goal of the enlargement, because it will always keep coming back as a sort of a problem that is brushed underneath the surface, under the carpet. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ivana.